What do you think about your creative push? Love it or hate it, let your opinion be heard by leaving a rating and review on iTunes. It only takes a couple minutes, and it's just about the nicest thing that you can do for podcasts that you love. Thank you, my pushers, for your valuable time in helping the show and spreading the word. Your Creative Push, episode 343.
Eventually you get to a point where on your own, you start to figure out what it is that you want, what it is that you need.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Emilija Angelovska. Emilija is an artist, educator, and change agent who's fascinated with the popularity of community art projects. And she is also the creator and host of the Back to the Drawing Board podcast, which cultivates a unique perspective on the shape, role, and meaning of visual art in the everyday world. And Emilija comes on the show today to talk about that podcast and how it started as a result of her having lost her creative community and wanting to make a new one. Emilija talks about the ways that community informs the individual and the individual informs the community, her advice for anyone looking to build a creative community, and the importance of surrounding yourself with individuals who might challenge your worldviews as opposed to agreeing with them no matter what. We also discuss how art and life are so closely intertwined, the elitism of art galleries, and how to create for the sake of creating. Emilija also talks about seeing teachers and professors as peers with individual opinions and tastes, learning to not take what other people say about your work too seriously, and the symptom of quantity over quality caused by social media. And finally, she shares why adults should always be learning and exploring, the importance of sometimes doing absolutely nothing, and her love for books and why it's fun to wreck them. So without further ado, sit back, relax, push those earbuds in, and enjoy my wide-ranging conversation with Emilija Angelovska. Emilija, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for coming on. I've been listening to you for the past couple weeks, once we kind of booked you to be on the show, listening to your podcast, which I think is a great companion podcast to this podcast, especially because you are very big into community and you go pretty deep into, because you're, well, I'll let you kind of set the stage to tell people like where you're at in your creative life, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I don't know how far back you want me to go.
You can go all the way to the beginning because I think it's important.
One day in January, I was born. So I think my creative journey began when I was in kindergarten. I don't know what age that would make me, maybe 5 or 6. And I remember as a class, we had to make a drawing, and the teachers afterwards gathered all the drawings and sent them in to this like local art competition. And I didn't think much about it. I literally drew it, handed it in, forgot about it. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a couple of weeks later, they brought like the little publication that the competition produced. And they were like, "Oh, congratulations, Emilija, you got like an honorable mention." And that was when my mom was kind of like, "Oh, cool. Maybe there's something there that we should explore." And I think she really encouraged me to, keep creating, keep drawing and making things, and signing me up for some drawing classes along the way. And then I ended up taking art classes in university. My major was art in university. So I completely dedicated myself to it. Yeah, during that time actually was when I started to notice that community was an essential aspect to my creative life, or an essential aspect to creating and to being motivated. More specifically, I noticed it when I graduated and I didn't have that community anymore. Like most of us have that. You don't know what you have until it's gone. That's when I lost all my community. All of my creative friends and family, the people I would get feedback from every day, and it was just, community was like a given at university. And I was out in the real world, and I no longer had meetings with the people from the university, from the art world in the university. And that is when I started the podcast and really made it a goal to create my own community and really to meet people that were into the same things and thinking about things in a similar way to the way I was thinking. And then, I started the podcast. I came to Amsterdam to research community art projects at university, and that's where I am right now. Almost done.
Almost? How much longer?
I finish in June.
Oh, wow. What was it, a 2-year program?
Yeah, a 2-year program. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, and I think that was one of the really, one of your really powerful episodes was 5 things that art school didn't teach me or doesn't teach people. Mm-hmm. And that 5th point that you had in that episode was the idea of like, you have to put in the work to maintain your connections, to maintain your community. And I think it works in 2 kind of facets. Like, one, like the friends that you make, the connections that you make, like if you don't actually put in the effort to to keep up with them, like they will sort of fizzle out. Mm-hmm. And then number 2 is like, you need to have that kind of community, even if it is just other creative people like working in the same place or like kind of bouncing ideas off of each other. And then if you don't have that, I love what you did. You made a podcast. Of course, I'm going to promote that.
Yeah.
But it's like you have to like create that for yourself, because I'm right there with you that like community is so important, because without, it's easy to not necessarily give up, but kind of like lose faith in art.
Yeah, and I think the thing a lot of people maybe don't realize is that living a creative life or doing something creative a lot of times is a very lonely activity. Unless you're creating collaborative art with another person, or you literally need a facility that a lot of people use, such as, for example, you are a printmaker and you have to go to a printmaking studio to use a printing press. Unless you're doing something very specific like that, a lot of the times creating is very lonely, and you're alone at your desk in a quiet room drawing and spending really long hours doing that. And actually, I was working on an exhibition, making these really huge drawings here in my living room. I had to move all the stuff away from the floor and like put them down on the floor. But I noticed that at the end of the day, because I wouldn't talk to anybody, my social interactions were so awkward because I was just in my head all day and really kind of forgot in a way how to speak to people. So it can be like a very lonely activity.
Yeah, for sure. You kind of lose touch with the outside world. And well, the other interesting thing that you talk about is the kind of boundaries between individual or self and community, and how it's maybe not as separate as one might think. And that was really interesting to me, because I've never really thought about that, the way that the individual affects the community and the way that the community actually affects the individual. So I was wondering if you could speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember a lot of times we say like what we identify as, I am a woman or I am Canadian. But a lot of times we don't realize how we form those identities and what that means. And for example, it's really important to know that we have 2 different types of identities. We have a personal identity and we have a social identity. And they actually interact with each other quite a bit. So the personal identity is, for example, I consider myself to be punctual, and I consider myself to be, tidy or creative. But on the other hand, the social identity is an identity that arises from my interaction with other people from the communities I belong to, the activities that I do. And those are actually quite interchangeable. So for example, we could think this is like a very obvious example, but if our parents raise us to always be tidy, they're really, as we're growing up, they are really putting their attention on cleaning up after ourselves. because of that social interaction we have with them, we end up developing a personal identity of ourselves as being a tidy person. But also even as a creative, you might think that, for example, you identify as a painter, but you don't realize that perhaps the cultural climate that you've grown up with socially has put a lot of emphasis and in a way conditioned you to really love and appreciate painting a touch more than maybe sculpture or drawing. So they're really quite, they work together quite closely. Now that's, of course, we have to acknowledge that some people, of course, have an inkling to paint, or some people just have an inner desire to paint, or they are better at painting than drawing. So we also have to take that into consideration.
And now, what would you suggest to somebody that maybe doesn't have the community, that maybe is struggling to figure out like where that kind of line is, and maybe wants to maybe nurture a different community, that they don't have those individuals around them, or they can't find something to help them to kind of go down that path of, being a painter, being a sculptor, fill in the blank. Do you have any suggestions for them to kind of build their community?
Yeah, I think the first step is really to get out of the house or the studio and to go to these events or places where you might find those people. So whether that is setting a goal for yourself once a week to go to a different gallery and not just to look at the art and then go home again, not speaking to anybody, but maybe to strike up a conversation with the person at the front desk. And start to build those relationships, or maybe look up some events, such as you can use the Meetup website or Eventbrite to look up some creative events in your area. A lot of them are for free that you could go to and meet other people that are also interested in the creative activities. And my second tip would be to actually not be afraid to have or to build a community with different people. I think a lot of times we tend to build our community with people that only agree with us, or with people that only think the way that we think. But when it really gets interesting and really helps to build your character, I think, is when we build a community with different sorts of people that have different outlooks on life, that have different areas that they come from. Whether it's somebody that is a psychologist and you think the way they look at your art is really interesting. I think somebody wouldn't consider bringing a psychologist into their creative community and into their creative circle. But you have to consider that that could actually bring something very interesting and something really new and creative into your work.
Yeah, psychologist would be definitely key, because one of my things that I promote, or like that I really believe in, is that art is the way, and creativity, whatever that may be for each individual, is the way that you figure out what you feel about the world and kind of your place in the world. And like I often say that, I don't really actually know what my opinion is on something, or like how I feel about something, until I've written about it, until I've kind of taken the time to really dive deep into something. And then I kind of surprise myself with my opinions or my thoughts on a certain topic. So if you have somebody else that's able to kind of look at what you wrote and ask you those questions, like those great questions about, is this how you feel about that? I think that's super key.
Yeah, I think something that irks me, that especially in the art world, that a lot of people don't realize is that art and life are actually really connected to each other. So there's a whole section in the arts that is called social arts. I'm sure you've heard about it, but any sort of art project that helps engage with people socially, or like political art that makes a comment politically on what is happening in the world. And the more reading I have done into community art projects, the more I realize how insane that is, and how it is literally impossible to make a piece of art that is removed from the world. Whether it's something as simple as you are using the paint that was made in today's world under the rules and regulations of our government and the politics, to something more complex, whereas you spend your day working at your 9 to 5 job. So you end up creating small drawings because that's the only time you have. These are bizarre examples, but really you can't, what I'm trying to say is it is impossible to remove the two from each other. And you really need to engage in life and be out there and experience things in order to be able to put something into your art.
Right, absolutely. And one of the other really important things that you mentioned before was the idea of surrounding yourself with other opinions or people that might challenge you to think in a different way. And I think especially in kind of the way that social media operates, Facebook and YouTube are trying to kind of keep you in an echo chamber, and maybe not like maliciously, but they see that you're interested in one thing, so they keep suggesting related articles. So whether you're, getting angry at the world, they're going to give you, here's something they clicked on, let's keep them angry. Or for YouTube, like pretty much the only suggestions that come up for me now are like kind of creative ideas or ways to get past sort of laziness and other types of blocks. So it's really interesting in that way. And it's almost like you have to push against that in order to find differing opinions to be able to challenge yourself. It's actually kind of difficult.
Yeah. And I think the prime reason for having a community is for that communication. And it's very difficult to learn anything or to go anywhere if you're only communicating with the same type of people, the people that have the same type of beliefs as yourself. And I remember there's a debate center here in Amsterdam, and people got angry because they brought in somebody from the right-wing party to come and speak about a controversial issue, saying that, these people shouldn't even have a platform to speak about their opinions because their opinions are, so wrong, so whatever. But if there's one thing that I have continually learned from the guests on my podcast is that what art can allow us to do, what our creative side, our creative productions can allow us to do is to open up that conversation and to really bring different ideas into the world and to challenge what we already think about the world and how we think.
Yeah, the situation you described, I see that happening all over the place. It's like I think that's like kind of the role of creative people, that if you have a creative inclination or if you think about the world in a different way and want to create something, you have that kind of drive inside of you to ask those questions. It's sort of your responsibility to do so. And if you're just kind of throwing out the vitriol, like throwing out the hate and just voicing your opinion and then, closing the browser, so to speak, that doesn't really do anything to serve the people on the other side that maybe have the other opinion. And then when that conversation gets shut down with like hatred and with just, like putting the earplugs in, that doesn't serve anyone or the community as a whole or the world as a whole and get us moving forward. And in fact, it puts us at a complete standstill where, art, I think, is supposed to elevate us to a new kind of consciousness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's actually quite a vicious cycle because I think our lack of community nowadays, our lack of even, for example, living in a house with multiple generations. We hardly do that anymore. Most people, especially in Canada and the US, move out of their family home by the time they're 18. This really individual way of living, we have forgotten how to have conversations. We have forgotten how to listen to a different side of opinion and try to understand it, or to have empathy, or to just listen and understand that somebody else might have a different opinion and life goes on, or to even have a productive conversation. A lot of people, when you bring up these controversial issues, they get so heated and so emotional about it. And we've stopped knowing how to have these normal conversations, which in turn makes us lose our community. So it really is a vicious cycle, I think.
one of the other disconnects is like art galleries. And I know that
Mhm.
you've, I believe you worked in art galleries
Yeah, I've
at
worked
some
in
point.
quite a few. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I know that you've commented on them in your podcast. There's sort of some elitism going on, or at least perceived elitism, where people are afraid, or artists are afraid of like kind of the gallery scene and feel like they
Mhm.
don't belong.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into play there, obviously. I think one of the things that really bothers me is that the way we talk about art is so unapproachable. Even if you do muster the courage as a non creative person to step into the gallery, the art that you look at might be so out there, you have no idea what you're looking at. So then you go to the little card that is on the wall, hoping that it might give you some insight. And there you see these super long, complicated words. It's funny, actually. I had a friend that went to a museum here in the Netherlands, and I asked her how it was. And she said that she felt like the curators had written sentences just for the sake of showing that they're smart.
Yep.
She said there was a sentence on there that was like 10 lines long. That is
Mm.
insane. I mean, I guess the Dutch language maybe can have some words that are a little bit longer than the English language, but still, that is that is quite excessive. So I think that is one of the huge problems, just the way we talk about it and the way we approach it. And I know it's something that I try to really do on my podcast is to just talk in a normal way to creative people about what they're doing and to think and approach their issues from an everyday perspective. I think that is really important.
Yeah, and what is that though? Because I noticed that too, and I'm not a visual artist either, but I know that when I go to museums, I have a difficult time sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
or art galleries. I have a difficult time understanding art in the way that I'm being told that I'm supposed to understand it. So I don't necessarily fall victim to it. I know exactly what you're saying about
Mm-hmm.
how even non-creative people like feel intimidated going into a place like that. But what is that, and how can especially creative people get past that feeling of, okay, well, I can't just sit down and create art for art's sake because it doesn't mean something, like having
Mm-hmm.
that big capital M word meaning,
Yeah.
like how can we push past that and just be able to create for creation's sake?
Yeah. I think firstly it's really important to really ask yourself why it is that you're creating. Because if you are somebody that is trying to create for the art world, wanting to get into a commercial gallery to sell your work, versus if you're somebody that wants to go down a research route or down a more artist experimental route, those are two completely different things. Also, versus if you are somebody that has a full-time job and maybe on the weekends likes to create art or on the evenings likes to create art. And I think being really self aware of where you fit in can help you to kind of navigate that world. Now, to address this word meaning, I think the way that I approach works when I go into a gallery is I try to approach them in a fun way. I don't know where this comes from, but I think a lot of us feel like there's like a puzzle and we have to solve the puzzle when we go into a gallery. We have to figure out what this plant standing in front of me means. What does it mean? What does the artist want to say? And I tell a lot of my friends when they go to an art space with me to just have fun with it. Look at what is presented in front of you and what do you think about? What sort of associations do you get? I remember with a friend, we saw it was an artwork of a nude body with some flowers next to it. And I just asked her, like, okay, what do you see? What does a nude body mean? Do you think there's a history, or do you know if there's a history of nude bodies in art history? What about the flower? Why is the flower there? Why are the two together? And it becomes fun it's a very creative process to look at art. It's a very imaginative process. It's fun. It's like making stories. And I think a lot of us are missing out on that fun aspect. I think that's something that a lot of art spaces could benefit from, actually.
You mentioned the guests on your podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering what other lessons maybe you've learned from them, whether it's about the art community or the creation process itself.
That's a good question. I was suspecting you would ask me that.
Good read.
Actually, the more people I interview, the more I find out that art can mean so many different things to so many different people. For some people, it's really about communication and starting that conversation. For some people, it's more about the therapeutic aspects and how it can help, for example, patients with brain trauma. To others, it can be a way that they are bringing some joy into their life. And all of these things are okay. And all of these things are okay to pursue and okay to do. And it has really, interviewing all of these people has really affirmed to me that there is no right or wrong way to do it. Again, of course, it comes down to what I said previously. If you're an artist trying to get into a commercial gallery and that is your goal, then yes, there might be within that discipline, within that sphere, there might be I'm putting quotation marks around this word, a wrong way to do it. But really, anything you choose, anything that art represents to you, anything that the creative process represents to you is okay. And the podcast is starting to prove to me that art does mean lots of different things to people, or art is a tool for lots of different things for people.
Yeah, and being okay with what it means to you individually.
Yeah.
I think you've even said this in your podcast, that art is meant to help you to enjoy life rather than just survive it. I think that's like the most eloquent way of putting it, because without this kind of like sidekick, it is hard to navigate this world, I believe.
Yeah, and even in psychology or like Eastern philosophy, the chakra systems, or I think it's the Maslow's triangle of survival. I don't know what it's called. Don't quote me on it. At the base of human survival is survival. It's getting food, water, shelter. And then we have reproduction, making sure that there is going to be other humans living after we die. But when we get beyond that, especially if you think within like Eastern philosophy, the chakra system, we start to get a little bit more into the intuition, into the imagination, into the communication. And these, once we have our survival figured out, we really need those for, again, I'm putting quotation marks around this, for ultimate fulfillment, for ultimate realization as humans, to really explore that side of us. I think it's a very important aspect.
No, I couldn't agree more. Just going back to that other episode I talked about with the things that art school didn't teach you. One of the other big takeaways from that was that teachers or professors, they're peers. And that they don't, what they say isn't necessarily like etched in stone. And I think for especially young people, this is a really important realization to make, especially when a teacher, like a high school art teacher or any subject, gives you an F or tells you that you're never going to be an artist. This is one of the things that really bugs me when previous guests, and a lot of them are professional artists, like very successful artists, they've had that experience of a teacher in the past telling them that they were bad, that they were terrible, that they were doing it wrong. And I think that it's a really important hurdle to get over, that, of course, respect teachers and respect that they are, trying to teach us stuff, but that their individual style or their individual opinion isn't from the heavens.
Yeah.
There are multiple ways, like you said before, to interpret art or to use art. So I think that was one of the really powerful messages for me, that to see teachers and professors as, peers.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I still do it. Sometimes I'm just so busy, or especially like in my undergraduate degree when I would have 10,000 projects to do at the same time. For some of them, I would just know, like, okay, I know what this professor is after. I know this idea will get me a good mark, and I will just do it quickly to get it over with. And I really struggled with this when I was younger, before I even entered art school, because my parents really raised me to do well in school and to, of course, respect my teachers and to listen to them. But slowly, as I got older, and especially when I entered into art school, I started to see different professors look and give me critique on the same work in different ways. And I still see it today. I would have studio critiques with 5 different people, and one person may tell me this drawing is the best of my work, and another person won't even tell me anything about it. It's like they didn't even notice it when they did the studio visit. And I think this is why it's so important for people to have diverse individuals in their creative community, because slowly you start to realize that different people see things differently. And just because one person has told you that this one piece you created, they think is not the strongest of your work, the next day you will have that psychologist come in and tell you they think it's brilliant. So really, it is quite subjective. And it really starts to develop, like I said earlier, your character. And you really, I don't know if I'm here yet, but I have heard, eventually you get to a point where on your own, you start to figure out what it is that you want, what it is that you need. And you start looking at your art and saying, this piece, I don't think it's there yet. And all of a sudden, those voices around you and that community around you, you don't rely on it as much to tell you, like, oh, this is wrong, or this is right, or this is the direction you should go into. I have heard that eventually I should be able to navigate that on my own. So we'll see if it happens.
Right. There you go. Again, the dissolving boundaries of, individual and community. I love that.
Yeah.
And as you were talking, I was thinking about, not just professors like having different opinions, like one saying, oh, this is an A, and the other saying, oh, this is an F, but also your following, your community that you build online, like having your Instagram followers. Many guests in the past have said, I'll share this one post and it won't get any traction, and I'll share another post and it will get a ton of traction, even though the post that I thought was going to do well did poorly, and the post that I thought was going to do poorly did so well. And then not only that, but just posting at different times of the day, the same post, like waiting a year and posting it in the afternoon as opposed to the evening. And then it suddenly gets a lot of traction. You can't necessarily always count on or let the opinions of others and the popularity of something dictate where you go from there, or how you feel about a particular piece.
Yeah, totally. Especially like with the social media world and platforms such as Facebook and Instagram. I think there's way too many factors involved. Maybe like everybody decided to post at 7 p.m. just like you on that day. Therefore, hardly anybody saw your post. And that means absolutely nothing about how good your image was that you posted. So I know for a lot of people, social media is very important, whether with their careers or it's something that they identify with, something that they enjoy doing. I really try not to attach a lot of importance to it. But I think to me, it has come really naturally because I didn't grow up with it. I think for a lot of people, it can be much harder to do.
For sure. Yeah, I was actually very interested to get your opinion on social media because I haven't heard you talk about it, actually. Do you post your art on social media, or is that kind of something that you step back from?
I used to, especially on my personal account. I did used to do it. I think what happened is I got busy and I felt like I didn't have something new and interesting to post every day. And it's one thing that I currently still struggle with about, especially Instagram as a platform, because sometimes I feel like I have to be posting every day. And sometimes most of the time, I do not have things to say every day. To me, it feels strange as a I'm not a content creator, as somebody that does have a platform online. It feels strange. But some days I literally wake up and I have nothing interesting or creative to add to that space. So I find it really hard to engage on there consistently. I don't know if that's something that is perhaps personal, but I guess I'm saying this so that if you also have that, to just know that you're not alone.
Right. No, I think a lot of people do have that where it's like, all right, you know what? I'm not feeling it today. But I think an important thing that I'm realizing recently is that when you're not feeling it, or something in your body is telling you that, you know what, you're not this person today, or you can take a break. Like, it's definitely okay to just say, all right, like, let's just put the phone down, or like, let's just go take a walk in nature. Let's go to an art gallery or whatever it is, to not feel forced. I feel like social media definitely gives us the impression that everybody else is doing it right, that everybody else is doing it perfectly and doing it consistently and doing it every day and posting perfect pictures and fill in the blank. But I think it is so important to step away and be one with yourself, as opposed to kind of like make that boundary between individual and community, to like really set it in stone for yourself.
Yeah, and I think it actually shows as a symptom, even outside of Instagram, that we have more of crappy things instead of less of good things. You know, where at this point where we feel like we constantly have to be putting stuff out, we constantly have to be posting something on Instagram. Every day we have to create something new. Every day we have to come up with a brilliant thought. And we end up putting out something every day into the world of a really low quality, instead of taking that time to be self-reflexive, to relax, to even be bored, so that the original and creative ideas can come up. And yeah, we really put the emphasis more on quantity rather than quality, which I think is something that bothers me.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's this whole idea of algorithms.
Yeah.
I feel like all of a sudden everyone's trying to like figure out algorithms, and it's like, wait, I thought we got past that in like seventh grade math. I thought we like didn't have to like think about algorithms every single day. And sometimes like the algorithm of our own life is way more interesting and important to figure out, where it's just like the algorithm is very simple. It's just like 1 = 1. It's just like, just relax, just chill.
Yeah, and it makes me a little bit sad. Does that mean that the only way you can be successful in the creative field or as an entrepreneur on social media, that you have to resort to these practices? I hope that it doesn't mean that. I hope that the good can prevail. No, I hope that in some way, as long as you keep being genuine and keep posting maybe less often, but really quality content, that perhaps you can somehow break the algorithm, or maybe slowly but surely find your community and find people that really resonate with your work.
Definitely. Well, and not to go back for the third time to, I guess I really did like that episode about what art school didn't teach you.
Nice.
But just to go back to it one more time, you also had this idea that it was kind of like a two-part idea, but like one, that everybody's always learning. You're always learning. Like, you never kind of reach that pinnacle of knowledge, like whether it's a teacher, whether it's you, like everybody is constantly learning. And then also, nobody knows what they're doing. Like nobody has like the grand answer, and everybody's kind of figuring it out as they go. So it's like trying not to take other people's opinions into account too much, or to realize that nobody has figured out the quote algorithm of art or social media or whatever it may be. Like, nobody has it figured out. So just like kind of taking it slow and figuring it out for yourself on an individual basis.
Yeah, and this actually bothers me a lot about adults in general, nothing to do with the creative world. But just in an everyday setting, I come across so many adults that are quite stubborn and quite set in their ways. Especially, I think, I hate stereotype, but I've noticed as people get a little bit older, they get used to a certain way that they like to do things, a certain way that they like to live, and they think of the world in a specific way. And you can tell they have stopped learning, they have stopped exploring, they have stopped having these conversations with different people, trying to understand different sides of the story. And I think we should always be learning. And it's one of the main reasons that I started the podcast, besides just to continue creating my community, but also to learn. I was learning so much. I went straight from high school into my bachelor's degree. And in my bachelor's degree, I was learning a lot. And then all of a sudden, it was the summer. I had graduated. I didn't have a job yet. And I was just sitting at home. And all of the days kind of looked the same. And I noticed that I wasn't learning anymore, but I still had this desire, this curiosity to keep learning. And that's one advantage that I think a lot of creative people have. If you're creative, it means that you already have that innate curiosity in yourself, that childlike curiosity. And I think that will really benefit you just in life in general as an adult to approach different situations and different circumstances and different people with the curiosity of, okay, what is this? What is this new thing? What's happening here? What can I learn? How do these people think differently than I do? I think it's a really strong characteristic to have.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that, when people talk about, being in a creative block, I've certainly been in blocks, and I'm trying to figure out kind of like a series of advice for people. And I think it's different for each individual person to get past a block. But aside from like walking in nature or just spending time with yourself, sometimes you have to like kind of just immerse yourself in stuff you don't know. And I think that when you can dive into a topic that you know nothing about, or that's completely unrelated to maybe your profession or to your own creative interests, like when you can dive into that, that's when your brain wakes up again, when it's like it needs to be on the job, it's clocked in, and it's like, all right, time to figure some stuff out. When the synapses are firing like that, trying to figure out stuff about this new topic, it makes connections to stuff you already know. And that's when I think creativity is at its best, is when you can bring your own experiences into stuff you don't know. So I think that learning is, you're right. I think something that people kind of, once they're done school, maybe abandon, but it's one of the things that keeps us young again, and also keeps us kind of creatively alive. Yeah,
no, totally. I totally agree with you. And it checks off the two boxes that we've been talking about. You are engaging with life. And, if you're not out there living, experiencing things, living life, you have nothing to create about. And also the second thing we've been talking about, that it's bringing in a new perspective. It's bringing in something from a different discipline, or, a new way of looking at the world into your work. But I also want to give one more, I guess, tip for creative block that I think maybe your listeners would find interesting.
Yes, please.
I want to know if you've heard of it before. But what I have noticed is sometimes I have overworked my brain, and I get to a point where I feel unmotivated to do anything, not even fun things. Like go take a shower. Nope, doesn't interest me. Read something. Nope, doesn't interest me. Paint something. Nope. And what I have found, actually, I still remember the first time this happened. I just sat on my bed and I stared out the window, because I literally felt like there was nothing I wanted to do. And I remember just sitting there and looking out the window, and I don't know how long it was. It wasn't that long, maybe 10, 15 minutes. Just thinking about things, staring, looking at what's happening out on the street. And after those 15 minutes, I just had this really strong urge to get up and go do something. I don't remember what the activity was anymore, but And that was so fascinating to me. And I think those moments of just doing nothing are really important. Whether you get bored in that moment and a new idea comes up, or whether you're just completely exhausted and your body just needs time to settle and ground itself. I think that's, something that maybe I want your listeners to try and to let me know if it works for them. I'm interested.
Right. No, and I think you're touching on something super important where I think meditation really helps people. It's that it's not even like the act of meditating and trying to let the thoughts go out of your head or, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's just taking a few minutes to disconnect. Because I feel like, especially with our like having a phone on you all the time and emails and kids and a job and TV shows that you need to catch up on and whatever, like our lives are so busy, but not necessarily like completely busy with stuff that needs to be on our thoughts all the time. I think it's kind of manufactured busyness, if that makes sense. Yeah. And it's like so important to just take that little bit of time to just like reconnect yourself with, existence, where it's like, all right, all these thoughts don't have to be racing through my head right now. I can just take 10 minutes to just be a human being on Earth and just being bored. Yeah. Like it's so important. But yeah, I love that tip.
Yeah. And I think also the fact that we're always doing something, we have really stopped engaging with our imagination. If you remember, like most of us when we were kids, we would imagine things, like we would stare out the car window as our parents were driving and we'd be like, oh, I wonder what would happen if the wheels on the bus were on the top of the bus, like something crazy. Yeah. Or we'd imagine like a purple sky. We don't do that anymore. And of course, we experience these creative blocks where we sit down on the chair with a paper in front of us and we go, I don't know what to do. We have stopped imagining things. And that is very sad, I think. And I'm also guilty of this. I'm not, I don't want to come off as like scolding others. It's also something I try to incorporate into my life.
Definitely. Before we let you go, I was wondering, did you have any like resources or any type of things that inspire you, whether it's books or movies or anything like that? Maybe when the sitting and looking out the window isn't helping to kind of get the inspiration going, something that kind of motivates you?
Oh, I love books. I love books a lot. Yeah, I think I asked for books for like my birthday last month.
Nice.
Yeah, I think books are very important for me, especially to get that imagination and inspiration going. And specifically, I like getting artist books with works from artists, whether from a specific project or a bunch of their different works. Because I love looking at these creative things that somebody has made and seeing the way somebody else has expressed their creativity. It kind of inspires me to be like, oh, I also want to express my creativity. And sometimes it can be really fun to just casually flip through a book with photographs. Again, going back to not doing something at every waking hour of the day, just to sit on the couch and flip through a book with, beautiful, inspiring, imaginative photographs, whether of drawings, of paintings, of sculptures. I think that really, really gets me going.
Definitely. And I don't even know why I asked you that question because I realized that you do have that section on your website called Bookshelf, where you do give recommendations for books that you've read. That's like once a month you do that too, right?
Yeah. No, actually, it has gotten so bad that I swear like almost every time I get on Instagram Live, I'm like, look what new book I got. That's not even part of the bookshelf. I'm just like, oh, I got another book and another book. It's kind of getting crazy.
Well, so actually something I wanted to ask you is then when you like pick up a book, do you read it just to read it, or are you kind of like actively like taking notes since you have that bookshelf section of your website?
Yeah, so most of the time when I'm just reading for myself, I do not take notes because I'm still in school and I'm doing research. So I'm literally always critically reading. So when I read on my own for fun, the last thing I want to do is take notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the bookshelf, it's a little bit different. Most of the books that I have read on there, I've actually read for the first time, obviously before sharing them. So whether that was like a year ago or 2 years ago or a month ago. So most of the time when I do end up deciding I want to share them on the bookshelf for that month, I will go back to the book and look at it and say, okay, why is it that I want to share this book? And what is it in there that I thought benefited me and that I thought could benefit other people? So in that sense, it's a little bit of both.
Very cool. Yeah, because that's something that I am doing recently as I'm going through books. It's highlighting, which is something that I never used to do because I don't know. I was afraid to I don't know. I was afraid to mess up the pristine nature of the book.
Some people are still against that. Hey, like I sometimes fold the pages at the top to mark where I am, and I've had people get angry at me because I've wrecked the book. So some people are really still into that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's really important to do though, because it's what better way to be able to go back to a book rather than reading the whole book, but to get the individual things that inspired you, so that when you are kind of feeling that that type of creative block or something, you just want to go back and get something that inspired you previously to maybe get the juices flowing again.
Yeah.
What better way than to highlight or to make notes? So wreck those books.
Yeah. And I think for me, that will actually change once I get out of school, because I read really fast. I've got the skill down to be able to do all these insane amounts of pages that they assign us in university. So because I read so fast, I notice sometimes when I'm reading something for fun, that maybe is an obvious example would be a self-help book where there is clear tips that you should follow in your life. I read it so fast that sometimes I have forgotten the details or even forgotten the steps that I was supposed to take. So I think in those cases, if you are reading a book that you're really trying to apply in your life, then I would go back and I would highlight, take notes, and probably pick one thing at a time to try to apply to my life.
Very cool. Emilija, this has been such a pleasure, but it is time for the final push. And the final push is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best final words of advice and push them to pursue their own creative passions.
All right. My creative push is to always keep challenging yourself, whether that is pick up a new book to read on a topic that you've never read before, or ask somebody to come and look at your art and chat with you about it, or seeing a new movie in a genre that you hate. I really hope that you never stop learning and exploring and just being curious about the world.
I love it. Emilija, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today,
Thank you.
sharing your inspiration. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It flew by, actually.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And for everybody listening, you can find Emilija on her website, EmilijaAngelovska.com, or you can find her podcast at backtothedrawingboardpodcast.com. But we'll have all of that linked up at today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/343. Emilija, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Big thank you once again to Emilija for coming on the show. One big takeaway that I want to leave you with before you go off on your creative day, and that is the idea of echo chambers. Like we were talking about in the episode, it is so easy to get caught up in echo chambers, especially when most of our social interactions happen on the internet, happen with social media. When the currency of these platforms is your attention, they are going to do anything to get your attention. And the easiest way to get that attention is to keep feeding you stuff that you've already tuned into. And even though this is sometimes good, like if you listen to Your Creative Push and you're not subscribed for some reason, hopefully it gets pushed back out to you. But it is sometimes detrimental to your worldview. And it takes a conscious effort to push through that and to get those other viewpoints and to actually dive into them. It takes research almost, like you're writing a term paper. And when we're so used to those types of feedback loops, that can definitely carry over to real life when you're interacting with people on the street or your friends or your family. So that's my motivation and challenge for you actually this week, is to not necessarily, although it could be good to, seek out strangers or seek out other people to bring into your creative community, but to not filter out the people that you do interact with on a daily basis. To not just have that click off mindset where when somebody says something that you don't agree with, to just shut them off. Try to see what they're talking about. Try to see the world from their eyes, from their past experiences. Perhaps ask questions about their past experiences so that you can see the world through a different set of eyes. This is something that I feel very strongly about, especially now that we are in this election period in the United States. We have a big problem in the United States. We have a big problem with not communicating with one another, with not seeing each other as human beings with individual experiences and needs and wants and desires and opinions and viewpoints and traumas. We need to look at each other in a much more loving way, definitely. But the only way to do that is to open up our arms and to invite other people into our communities, into our creative communities, and into our communities as a whole. On our next episode, we have Daniel Jose Older. Daniel is the New York Times bestselling author of the middle grade historical fantasy series Dactyl Hill Squad, the Bone Street Rumba urban fantasy series, Star Wars Last Shot, and the award-winning young adult series The Shadow Shaper Cipher, which won the International Latino Book Award and was named one of Esquire's 80 books every person should read. If you want to find out more about Daniel, you can head to his website, danieljoseolder.net, or you can find him on Twitter at DJOlder. And of course, you can find those links as well as everything we talked about today with Emilija at yourcreativepush.com/343. But that is all I've got for you today. So hopefully you were inspired to go and get your creative work done. So go and get it done. I love you all so much. We will see you next week if you need the push again. And remember that the universe deserves your creativity, and you are the universe. Bye.